Just now, I briefly discussed and shared some specific important content and teachings from the words of my perfect teacher with everyone here today in detail. One topic was the current important position and status of the words of my perfect teacher within Tibetan Buddhism teachings and practices today. The great importance and significance of the preliminary practices for all practitioners worldwide. I also talked a bit about some of our related questions and concerns regarding the preliminaries in detail clearly. Some people often have the mistaken idea and belief that the preliminaries are simply unnecessary. And in our future spiritual practice, it's not enough to just understand the theory. Actual practice is extremely important and very essential for progress. I've shared some of my own views and thoughts on this topic. Whether you have some theoretical doubts, since in terms of personal realization and personal growth, I myself have not yet achieved a very high level, but perhaps I've spent a bit more time and dedication on this particular aspect than others have. In terms of sustained effort among those people present here today, I may have devoted more focus and energy to it throughout my life. At Larunga, apart from studying, contemplating and practicing Buddhism, basically in the valley where our institute is located, we don't really have any other work to do. So in this regard, I may have spent a bit more time. But sometimes, if wisdom is lacking, time alone doesn't necessarily prove anything. So I'd like to hear what ideas and questions you all have today and want to share, whether about Tibetan Buddhism teachings and practices, or about how we currently promote the Dharma and benefit sentient beings. If you have any suggestions or thoughts, we can communicate and discuss them together in depth and detail. This approach and method is also quite suitable and beneficial for everyone. If you have any questions or concerns, let's all share and exchange ideas openly and freely. And if there's enough time available later on, I can continue with the lecture in more detail as well.
There are two questions that have always troubled me. First, Buddhism talks about reincarnation, but at the same time it teaches no self and emptiness. I feel there's a bit of a contradiction. Could you please explain this to me? That's my first question. My second question is this. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is actually a spiritual practice known as the union of male and female. I've always been quite confused about this particular issue. Could you please explain it to us in a bit more detail? Thank you very much.
Now, these two questions are both very good and insightful. Many people have asked me these two questions as well on different occasions. I have answered these questions in different ways before, depending on the specific context. Today, in response to your first question, in Buddhism, we often talk about the profound concept of the emptiness of all phenomena. For example, the Diamond Sutra also says all forms are illusory, but it also speaks of the suffering of samsara and the infallibility of cause and effect. As practicing Buddhists, we must clearly understand that these are two completely different domains and areas of knowledge. In essence, Buddhism specifically talks about the ultimate truth and reality. In other words, from the perspective of the true nature of all things in existence, whether it's samsara or karma, everything is completely empty. There is nothing with real substance. Even things like me eating today, simply walking, or both you and I ourselves are considered empty. From the essential viewpoint of Buddhism, the act of you asking questions is empty, and my answering them is also empty. Even the city of Beijing, where we are today, is regarded as empty. If we broaden the scope a bit, the human world is also empty, and so is hell. So from the deeper levels of Buddhism, from the perspective of the wisdom of emptiness, there is nothing that is not empty. Why do we say this? Because you and I, whether it's our physical bodies or our conscious awareness, in any form or state, if we examine them in detail, there is nothing truly real to be found. This is not just a concept or theory in Buddhist philosophy. In fact, nowadays physicists, especially quantum mechanics, also acknowledge this. They keep analyzing, breaking things down into molecules, particles, electrons, and finally quarks. Then it all comes down to magnetic fields. And ultimately, when you look even deeper, it's just a form of energy. Didn't Bohr say that if you study quantum mechanics and aren't shocked, or even a little bit bewildered, then you probably haven't really understood it at all. It means you haven't really understood quantum mechanics yet. For example, if you ask a physicist whether this teacup exists, he would say that it appears to exist, but in reality it's made up of countless tiny particles. But as for the true nature of these particles, they are still investigating it now. Apart from being a form of energy, it's impossible for them to exist independently. That's why we admire the wisdom of Shakyamuni Buddha. 2,500 years ago, humanity didn't even have any science. Including Western culture, modern science has only been around for approximately 200 or 300 years. True science, just about 2 or 3 centuries. Nowadays, all of us especially envy the advanced technology of the West, but whether it's quantum mechanics or relativity, the scientific discoveries made by the West, the results of their observations were already described in the Madhyamaka and Prajna philosophies of Buddhism. They all say the same thing. So in this process, we have no choice but to admit all phenomena, including samsara, even the 6 realms of rebirth you just mentioned, are no exception. Since neither you nor I can find any true essence or substance, the 6 realms of samsara, heavenly realms, human realm, hell realms, are ultimately empty. So if they are empty, how can karma and rebirth exist? How can samsara exist? This is in terms of appearance. Such appearances are not deceptive or illusory phenomena at all. Before we actually realize the ultimate truth, they are indeed real in our experience. Its essence is empty, but it still appears. So nowadays, many people take this as the Buddhist view. Why does Buddhism say that all phenomena are empty and yet samsara exists? Aren't these two contradictory? Many people ask this question. Actually, this is very simple. Not only physicists, but in Buddhism we also say form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form. Physicists say this as well. The appearance of the bottle is a phenomenon. Its essence should be made up of countless extremely microscopic particles. So if we ask a physicist, since the bottle is made up of various particles, how can it hold water on top of those particles? Actually, they don't admit that water can be held on top of the particles themselves either. It's just that after the appearance of these particles aggregates, it can hold water. So regarding this question, I think when Shakyamuni Buddha first turned the wheel of dharma, he did not talk about emptiness. He only spoke about the existence of all things, the existence of karma and cause and effect, including the existence of samsara. All of these were explained very clearly. When it came to the second turning of the wheel of dharma, these existences were just what we worldly people talk about. In reality, their true nature is in fact not truly existent. Then the instructions and teachings on discerning emptiness were carefully given. When it came to the third turning of the wheel of dharma, was it just a simple emptiness? Now, physicists, including quantum physicists, think it is just emptiness. The luminous aspect of our mind has not been discovered and cannot be described. When Shakyamuni Buddha gave the third turning of the wheel of dharma, he spoke of the luminous nature of the Tathagata Garbha, and in Vajrayana teachings as well, it is taught that it is not just emptiness. If it were only emptiness, then nothing would exist, and non-existence itself would become the truth. At that time, the innate dharma nature of all phenomena was taught. This so-called inconceivable dharma nature is what is taught in the third turning of the wheel of dharma. This is where the greatness of the Buddha lies. Any scholar typically only researches a partial aspect of the content within their field, but they have never fully and comprehensively discussed the progression from form to emptiness to luminosity. Such a state has never been described. Therefore, when we try to understand this all existence on the level of appearance, phenomena, and illusion, our discriminating thoughts are also like this. For example, if we talk about the existence of people, without investigation, I exist and you exist. But when you examine it, the body is not the self, and thoughts are not the self. You cannot find the so-called self anywhere. Is there a contradiction between having a self and not? There isn't. Before we attain realization, we have this kind of illusory attachment. Why is it called conventional truth? Why is it called an illusion? This is the reason. All forms are illusory. On the level of appearance, everything is like an illusion or a dream. We often use this analogy. This one looks really ugly and unappealing. This other teacup looks very nice and beautiful. Is this statement contradictory? I said it was ugly before, and now I say it's nice and attractive. This is exactly where the profound Madhyamaka philosophy and teachings comes in to help us understand reality. How do you actually perceive and understand it deeply? You can see and examine for yourselves clearly and directly. The second important question, actually the so-called dual practice mentioned in Tibetan Buddhism. What is meant by dual practice? The other day in Hong Kong, at the event called the Second World Youth Buddhist Symposium, some people in the audience also asked this particular question. At that time, there was Gan Yao Quan, who is the current president of the Buddhist Society at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. He gave a detailed and comprehensive answer to the questioner, who actually raised the exact same question as you did here today in this gathering. In fact, this is a very advanced and profound tantric practice method in Tibetan Buddhism teachings and tradition that requires proper guidance. His respected spiritual teacher and master is Liu Ruiji. Liu Ruiji's teacher was the second Dujom Rinpoche, a highly respected master. The second Dujom Rinpoche was a highly respected yogi who actually practiced dual practice. When it came to Liu Ruiji, however, he said that his disciples did not have such a high level of realization, so he did not pass on this practice. Is there really such a practice method? This is actually not only found in Tibetan Buddhism. In fact, in Chinese Han Buddhism, although it is not openly discussed how to practice or what to do, there are actually many references in the Buddhist scriptures as well. Some time ago in various teachings I gave, and I quoted some classic scriptural evidence from ancient texts and commentaries. Actually, what is called the union of male and female is the way of yin and yang in the cosmos. Every dharma represents the principle of yin and yang in Buddhist philosophy. It is not truly what we call worldly desire or greed that gives rise to it at all in this context as we understand. If it really were caused by greed, then would there be such a so-called trend in Tibetan Buddhism today? In the present era, there is not. That day, I told them that in our Buddhist academy, those scholars who have been studying for more than 20 years have basically visited almost all of the monasteries throughout the Tibetan region. They have not found any monastery that encourages dual practice. In fact, the monastic discipline that is observed within Tibetan Buddhism is, in some cases, even stricter and more rigorous than the Vinaya schools in Han Chinese Buddhist temples that specifically specialize in the study and practice of precepts. In reality, it is a practice that requires a very high level of realization. What does this actually mean? It is also discussed in Vajrayana Buddhism. The Huayan Sutra and other related sutras have also mentioned this. When it comes to this highest state, the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch says afflictions are bodhi. What does this mean? Actually, within afflictions there are greed, anger, ignorance, arrogance, jealousy, and so on, among many others. If you say these afflictions are bodhi, it sounds a bit hard to believe at first hearing. Greed, anger, and ignorance are not good. According to the Theravada precepts, they should be eliminated. Whereas wisdom and compassion, these are the true causes of bodhi. So how can afflictions be bodhi? It seems very hard to understand. But in reality, if you look at how people in the world are attached to romantic relationships between men and women, they think that this is pure, that is impure. Greed is very impure, while faith is pure, this kind of attachment. But from the perspective of wisdom, and when we consider it carefully, in essence, both of these are unreasonable. In essence, the concept of greed does not truly exist, and the wisdom that is said to eliminate greed also doesn't exist in reality. That's why in Vajrayana it is specifically taught that, for example, people often hold deeply rooted notions of impurity about things like human flesh, urine, and feces. However, when you reach the highest possible state, even these things can be offered as sacred offerings. If you have not reached such a high state, of course, this is not allowed. So here it is about eliminating a certain attachment to our afflictions. When Buddhas and Bodhisattvas manifest, there is such an appearance. This appearance represents yin and yang. It is not the worldly so-called greed and anger. Of course, there are some individuals who, because they do not understand the most profound meaning, use the so-called dual practice or so-called greed, sometimes as an excuse for themselves. He himself has not reached this state, and perhaps his practice has deviated as well. There was such a period in the history of Tibetan Buddhism. Later, during the later propagation period, after Venerable Atisha came to Tibet, at that time, some behaviors in Tibet were not very appropriate. He demanded that all of these be prohibited. Since Atisha arrived in Tibet, basically even such appearances have now disappeared. However, in reality, we need to completely eliminate emotional attachment between men and women. In the end, there must be a clear representation of both appearance and emptiness, because, as I mentioned earlier, all phenomena are the same. The nature of the mind is emptiness. This is called wisdom. This nature can manifest as luminosity, which is called skillful means or great compassion. Emptiness represents the Buddha Mother, and manifestation represents the Buddha Father. For us, worldly people, Buddha Father and Buddha Mother refer to male and female, yin and yang. Generally speaking, in daily life, this is also an indispensable component, a kind of structure. In daily life, whether it's long and short or high and low, our world is completely and totally a world of opposites in every aspect. So as a representation in manifestation, it takes on such forms. But in reality, it represents appearance and emptiness. For those who have realized the true nature of mind and reality, there is no such attachment. Therefore, this is a very high and profound state of realization beyond ordinary understanding. I've given a few lectures before, in which I quoted many sources from Han Chinese traditions, including previous translations. Many people also rely on these teachings and practices, including a number of traditional methods that are commonly used. Not only are there such teachings in Tibet, but there are also some very profound instructions found in Han Chinese regions as well.
Among the lineage masters of Dzogchen, there is one called Sri Singha. I had heard before. When I was at the Buddhist Academy, His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche mentioned he seemed to be Han Chinese from Xi'an. He is the guru of Padmasambhava in the lineage. What kind of transmission is it between them exactly? Is it referring to the mind direct transmission of the Buddha specifically? Then there is the sign transmission of the Vidyadharas, and also oral transmission from individuals as well. Among these three types of transmission, which one would you say Dzogchen specifically emphasizes?
Sri Singha is said to be originally from the Han region, according to the pith instructions and the detailed teachings of many renowned masters. On this particular point, the Longchen Nyingtik tradition is known to have a grand, rich and extensive history, the great and illustrious history of the Longchen Nyingtik. In that ancient history, it is said that Sri Singha is Tashichigo, also known as the Auspicious Gate specifically. The Auspicious Gate, according to some ancient historical sources, refers to Xi'an in modern-day China. I have also looked through some historical records about Sri Singha and the Han region in the past, because the detailed chronological records of the Dzogchen patriarchs are basically closely related to this, including the chronologies of Garab Dorje and Vimalamitra, which are in fact not very detailed or comprehensive. Vimalamitra is said to have come to Tibet together with Guru Padmasambhava. So based on this, we can roughly deduce certain things. Other than this, there really isn't any particularly detailed information available. As for which city in Han Chinese region this was, although historical records do mention which city Sri Singha was from, if you try to pinpoint exactly which modern city it corresponds to, I'm afraid that would be quite difficult unless you had access to the specific teachings of certain masters on this point. Generally speaking, Dzogchen includes all three types of transmission, whether it's the mind direct transmission of the Buddhas, sign transmission of the Vidyadharas, or oral transmission from individuals. Because Dzogchen, including in the famous and authoritative The Words of My Perfect Teacher text, in the section before the Guru Yoga, at the end, the different lineages from various masters are all explained. I also created a complete chart of the lineage masters later on, and from this chart you can also see it clearly.
There's another question. When practicing the 5 preliminary practices in the Nyingma tradition, one must begin with full prostrations. For example, in the Sakya tradition, there isn't a particular emphasis on full prostrations. So in terms of the path of practice between these two schools, is it acceptable to skip full prostrations, or are they absolutely necessary?
Here's how it is. If you are practicing according to the Nyingma tradition, you absolutely cannot skip them, you must do them. However, if you are studying the Sakya tradition, it's also generally acceptable not to do them. For example, every doctor prescribes their own medicine. This morning, I used the analogy of medicine to explain the differences. In their prescription, they must always include this particular ingredient. So, if you are following the lineage of the words of my perfect teacher, even if you are from the Sakya tradition, it is generally considered best to complete the entire practice. For instance, if I'm practicing Sakya teachings, including important texts such as the Three Visions, fundamental teachings of the Sakya lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, even though I am from the Nyingma tradition, and since I am relying on this teaching with faith, it's perfectly fine to practice according to its original instructions and essential points, as these are very important. So in our practice, in some teachings, for example, when you practice wind, channels, and drops, in some practices, the essential channel is on the right, while in others it's on the left. There are many different methods of practice, and when there are different methods, we need to carefully determine which ritual text to rely on and which teaching to follow in this context. If I want to complete the 4 preliminaries of the Sakya tradition, it's not necessarily required to do full prostrations. You can complete all the preliminaries that are required as part of the Sakya tradition. If I want to fulfill the requirements of the Nyingma tradition, then I should practice according to the requirements of the lineage masters and the ritual texts of the tradition. So I think each approach is valid, and there is no contradiction. However, you can't just skip a practice because it's not emphasized in one place, or insist on practicing something just because it's emphasized in another. If you insist on adding something extra to the Sakya preliminaries, that would probably be unreasonable. The reason I'm emphasizing following each tradition's lineage today is that when you practice, you should prioritize the lineage. For example, in our Nyingma tradition, on one hand, we say that prostrations in the preliminaries practice bring immense merit, with each prostration done sincerely and wholeheartedly, and I personally highly recommend it as a foundational practice for everyone starting out. When I ask them to do the preliminaries, I always require them to do 100,000 full prostrations. Why is that? Because people who haven't done 100,000 full prostrations tend to be a bit arrogant. Prostrations are actually a remedy for arrogance. After you've done 100,000 full prostrations, you become quite humble, and it really helps to counteract afflictive emotions. You start to feel that in your own mind stream, you have already made 100,000 prostrations before all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So what arrogance could possibly remain? That's why, generally speaking, when some devout Dharma friends ask me about this, regardless of which tradition they practice, I tell them, no matter what, as ordinary people, we still harbor a lot of pride in our hearts. If you're a Buddhist, then in front of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, first you should set aside all worldly values, then with utmost respect make 100,000 full prostrations to the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas and lineage masters, bowing down with your whole body. After that, you might truly begin to soften your mind stream and things will become more reasonable.
I have one last question, and I apologize for bothering you. In Dzogchen, there are the Mind series, the Space series, and the Instruction series of teachings. Many of these require receiving empowerment and are not taught in public settings or open gatherings. One cannot casually read these scriptures, otherwise it would be considered the transgression of stealing the dharma. But nowadays, a lot of these materials are circulating, especially the teaching materials of the Nyingma school's Dzogchen are particularly abundant. I see that many of these scriptures have been translated. Especially the Dzogchen scriptural materials are particularly abundant. In this situation, if one hasn't completed the 5 preliminary practices or received the Guru's permission, is it permissible to read up to the Mind series and Space series? And for the Instruction series, does it generally depend on a qualified Guru's decision?
None of this has been permitted for open distribution. I think, although some Dzogchen translations are now in circulation, in principle all of my Tantric teachings require proper empowerment and guidance. They have neither been put online nor officially circulated. Last night, a few publishers approached me to discuss because they wanted to publish some of the Tantric materials. I told them that it's not urgent for now and we can talk about it later. But within La Rongar, for a few individuals who have received the transmission, we printed some copies for their convenience. After printing them, we all have this kind of flaw as people. As soon as something is secret, everyone wants to get it. As soon as it's made public, no one comes to listen. I told them that the preliminary practices are completely open to the public, but very few people actually take up the preliminary practices. As for the secrecy of Tantric teachings, such as the six bardos, the Guru's heart essence and the secret essence Tantra, many people still secretly circulate them. But regardless, this is how we see it. Even if some people have read the practice texts, if they haven't actually received the empowerment of the preliminary practices or the Guru's transmission, even if you read the practice text, the true meaning of the dharma may not necessarily enter your heart. Because on one hand, there are guardianship of the dharma protectors, and on top of that, you haven't gone through the proper step-by-step procedures. Even if you read the practice text, I have seen many people do this. Although they have read the text, they do not actually understand the teachings within it. So I think even though many people have read the practice texts, it might not be such a serious issue. Because in fact, it's not the case that just because you read a practice text, you have committed the offense of stealing the dharma. After you read the practice text, just like the question he asked earlier about dual practice or subjugation, these are very profound teachings, and without a certain foundation, you won't understand them. If you have not established a solid foundation and developed wrong views towards them, that is the boundary for committing the offense of stealing the dharma. So generally speaking, there really won't be any faults or issues in this particular regard. Furthermore, regarding esoteric teachings, it's not that the realm section and mind section can be shown to just anyone you want. They should only be taught to those who have received the corresponding empowerment. It's best to keep them strictly confidential. Although we live in the information age, it is very difficult to keep secrets now, but you should try your best. As long as you consistently maintain a confidential and discreet attitude, its blessings will be even more truly extraordinary and remarkable.
Hello, Khenpo. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to listen to your teachings today. When I was reading the book titled The Words of My Perfect Teacher, there was a particular part or section that I didn't quite fully understand, and it left me feeling a bit puzzled. In the Vajrasattva practice, when reciting the 100-syllable mantra, there is a three-dimensional visualization. I'm not entirely sure how exactly I should visualize it during the practice. That's one question I have. Also, I'm not completely certain if we are reciting the text accurately enough. Would it be okay to use Chinese? If not, could you perhaps guide us through a proper chanting of it so we can follow along? That's one question. Another question is, in the uncommon inner preliminaries, there is the practice to accumulate merit. When we're talking about the practice of making mandala offerings and visualization, there is the 37-heap mandala and also the 7-heap mandala offering. We don't know if there are any specific location requirements. Is there a particular order when arranging these offerings? How should we arrange them? Please give us some guidance.
In the Vajrasattva visualization process, it is actually visualized as a three-dimensional form. There is a hum syllable in the center. Then the others are arranged around it in a three-dimensional form. This isn't particularly difficult. Whenever we are visualizing a mantra wheel during our practice, for example, there is a seed syllable hum in the very center, and then the other syllables rotate around it on the outside.
From which direction should it actually go? In which direction does its three-dimensional form exactly move?
Yes, that's right. Generally, it rotates to the right. It slowly rotates like this, as you can see. That's the first point. Second, regarding the practice of mandala you just mentioned earlier, when we usually practice the mandala as part of our preliminary practices together, there are actually two different types we use. One of these is known as the mandala, specifically for practice purposes, which is a type that is usually placed and kept in the shrine room for offerings. There is also the actual offering mandala that you hold, which is the mandala you actually use yourself to make offerings and count your repetitions. When using it during your practice session, you first make an initial offering with the 37 heaps mandala. After that, you use the 3 kayas mandala or the 7 heaps mandala. Because you need to keep count, you begin carefully counting aloud as you recite. At the beginning, there may not be such strict requirements. At first, you recite Om Benza Bhumi Ahom. Gradually, you first make a thorough and complete offering step by step. Then recite the other words as you proceed. For example, recite 4 lines verse. You can practice it while reciting those 4 lines verse. This might only truly become clear when you see someone else performing a mandala ritual.
The first question is, could you please chant the mantra for us using that 3D visualization diagram? Can I use Chinese?
The singing goes like this. Actually, the text should be exactly the same. There might be slight differences, but it's nothing significant. Does it matter if the pronunciation isn't accurate? It should be fine. Just recite it once in Chinese.
I have a question. Now, there's a set of three-dimensional visualization videos that are presently available online. I'm also using them, but I'm not very familiar with them. So, should we be watching these visualizations?
Yes, you can. Wasn't there a three-dimensional Vajrasattva video by Khenpo Yeshe Puntsok? It included all the recitations of the mantra Om Benza Sato Hung, as well as the entire 100-syllable mantra, both of which are important components of the Vajrasattva practice. All the arrangements are included in there. Take a look at it when you have time. There should be a Vajrasattva. What's it called exactly? He made a detailed 3D version of the deity at that time back then. Khenpo Yeshe Puntsok always says that he spent a lot of money on it, saying it was really beautifully and skillfully well made.
Was that ritual revealed by His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche? So does that mean this transmission has only a few decades?
Not exactly. Actually, we can also talk about Vajrasattva tomorrow if you would like. In the Tang esoteric Buddhism tradition of our Han region, there are similar practices, including the Vajrasattva practice and the 100-syllable mantra. There are special teachings talking about their merits. In our Tibetan region, it has been traditionally practiced for many years. People have been continuously reciting it for several hundred years. Perhaps its spread to the Han region was something quite special during the time of His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche. In the past, although the 100-syllable mantra and its merits were included in the Tang esoteric section of the Tripitaka, I have translated it before. There are many Vajrasattva practices included within it. In the context of Vajrasattva, it refers to Samantabhadra Buddha. These practices, including the 100-syllable mantra, also exist in the Han region. However, they were not so widely propagated. It was probably about a decade or so ago that His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche said Larunga would hold a special Dharma assembly for the Han region, dedicated to benefiting sentient beings, called the Vajrasattva Dharma Assembly. Since then, the promotion of it in various Han Buddhist centers has increased significantly.
If I get sleepy and almost fall asleep as soon as I start meditating, is that a karmic obstacle? How should I deal with it?
If you get so sleepy that you actually end up falling asleep, well, yesterday I was especially tired. I wondered if maybe it was because of the end of the world or something like that. So honestly, it's really nothing to worry about at all.
Homage to Venerable Khenpo Rinpoche. I would like to ask a few questions about karma. Is there a difference in the results between intentional and unintentional karma?
Intentional and unintentional?
Unintentional karma refers to actions done without deliberate intention, not done very purposefully. Is there a difference between these two?
There is indeed a difference between the two, because according to the law of karma, as explained in the Sutra on the differentiation of karmic retribution, the Abhidharma Kosha, and the Agama Sutras, we can understand this principle clearly from the perspectives of these traditional classic texts. Karma that is done intentionally and with full awareness tends to ripen and bear fruit more quickly than unintentional actions. The results that ripen from it, whether it's doing good deeds or bad deeds in our daily lives, its karmic power is actually extremely strong and swift. If it's done unintentionally, for example, when we're walking along the path outside, we might accidentally step on an insect without realizing it at all at the time. Or if you have taken a vow to be vegetarian but accidentally eat some meat that was mixed into your food, that would be a very minor offense, something not particularly serious at all. It's not regarded as a very serious offense. So in the precepts, for example, when it comes to the act of killing, you must be fully aware that you are intentionally attempting to kill someone. This is a crucial prerequisite condition. If I originally intended to kill person A, but ended up killing person B or C instead, because I didn't actually intend to kill them and killed someone else by mistake, it doesn't violate the fundamental precept. So, intentional and unintentional karma can make a significant and important difference in the law of cause and effect in Buddhism.
Also, before learning about Buddhism, sometimes in our daily lives we help others. But in the process of helping some people, we may actually harm others. In this process, karma is definitely generated. For us ordinary beings with so much negative karma, is it enough to just repent for such karmic obstacles we have created in the past?
It should be sufficient for purification purposes because you didn't have the actual deliberate intention to harm others at any point. Your sole intention was entirely to help, and in the process of trying to help people in need, when I help others or do good deeds with wholesome motivation, if I inadvertently harm someone else unintentionally in the process by accident, sometimes when I help others, I also think, for example, there are some impoverished students who are truly pitiful, and if I do not help them, it seems as though they lack wisdom and will not have opportunities to grow or develop in the future. I once helped someone like this before. After he grew up, he unfortunately became especially bad, and he used his intelligence to harm many people. But did I make a mistake? I definitely did not, because my intentions were entirely altruistic during the whole process. I had nothing at all to gain from it personally. Even though what he did was harmful to himself, it actually doesn't harm me. I myself do not generate karma. That karma is his to bear. Because my intentions toward him were completely good, and good intentions do not bring bad consequences. Whether it's my actions or my intentions, generally when karma is created, it comes from either actions or the mind. But both my actions and my genuine motivation were entirely aimed at benefiting him. There was absolutely nothing evil in them.
It all depends on the starting point of each person's intention.
Right? So in the preliminary practices, it says, the appearance of good or evil is not nearly as significant. Ultimately, the intention behind good or evil holds greater importance. Jigme Lingpa, in the beginning of the preliminary practices, has a line that says, the intention behind good and evil is very important. The appearance of good and evil is not.
My final question is this. When others feel joy and develop a pure mind towards someone, is it because of that person's charisma or because of their karmic merit? Because some people aren't particularly handsome or beautiful, yet you just want to be close to them. Is it because of this person's karma or because of their charisma?
Since he has no charm whatsoever, it's impossible to be attracted by any charisma he might have. Just kidding with you. This might also be a kind of karmic connection from previous lifetimes, in a way if we consider it. Because in Buddhism, we say that, for example, the first time you meet someone, you feel something different and unexplainable. It feels like you've known them before in another time, like this person is very familiar to you somehow. It feels as if this person is especially close to you from the very start of meeting. According to Buddhist texts and teachings, this is a kind of karmic connection. But there are two types of such karmic connections. Generally speaking, when it comes to highly accomplished monks or truly virtuous teachers, the genuine joy and pure and open mind we feel toward them brings us a sense of liberation and happiness in our hearts. But for ordinary people, it might be a sense of dependence on that person or a kind of attachment to them, which is actually closely related to past lives. In past lives, it's very possible, like people often say, you owe me, I owe you, because perhaps you made a shared vow with that person. For example, you might have made a shared vow together in front of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, life after life. If you have made such a shared vow, then when you meet in this lifetime, you will feel something different. It's also very possible that in a past life, you were actually enemies. If you were enemies, then when you meet that person in this life once again, maybe on the surface you seem to be very close, but in reality there is actually a kind of emotional debt between you. So this kind of karmic connection, when you study the section on causes and conditions in the Abhidharma Kosha, you realize it's actually very complex. Therefore, in this very life, many of our special feelings and unique inclinations, in fact, truly, are still related to many past lives. Recently, I was translating a work by a very remarkable and highly respected master in Tibetan Buddhism named Migyur Dorje, a great master of the Namcho tradition in the Nyingma school. He could recall as many as 200 of his past lives. Sometimes he was even reborn as a dog. Sometimes he became an animal, sometimes a human being. He went through all kinds of unique and varied experiences. In each of these lives, he and his teacher in this life, Karma Chagme Rinpoche, shared many lifetimes of deep and meaningful connection. Sometimes Karma Chagme Rinpoche would become a horse and he would become a young foal. There were truly many such significant connections between them. Sometimes when you see karma, it really is quite frightening. This includes the things we might encounter in this life. It's not necessarily without reason. There are many causes and conditions coming together. After reading this biography, many people might gradually come to realize that the close, special, and meaningful feelings or unique relationships they have in this life actually span many lifetimes. As I was translating, I've only translated a little over 100 so far, and there are still more than 100 left. But each of these stories is very short, unlike the 100 Deed Sutra, which is very long. He just tells them simply. At that time, what he became and what I became, how he died, how I died. It's just described simply, segment by segment like that. It seems he only lived to be 20, or maybe just in his teens, and passed away at that time. Chagme Rinpoche was his guru, but from a very young age, he was able to gradually develop many important ritual practices. So now, all the great masters of the Paleo lineage recite the sadhanas originally composed by Migyur Dorje. He belonged to the Namche tradition. Within the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism, there is a sub-school called the Namche tradition. Migyur Dorje is the founder of the Namche tradition. Chagme Rinpoche was his guru. And the relationship between them, whenever I see it, is especially fascinating and quite remarkable. So, regarding your question just now, whether it's about the guru or anyone else, there is something special about it which should be related to karmic connections from past lives. But as for the specifics of this karmic connection, it may depend on the particular circumstances.
Thank you very much. Finally, on behalf of the class, we sincerely request that next year we can visit Larongga Buddhist Academy and attend Khenpo's teachings. Thank you.
I have one last question to ask you today. Now, many disciples in the Han regions of China face a common difficulty: how to choose their own guru properly and wisely. Because when it comes to gurus, I personally think there is such a thing as a karmically connected guru from past lives. When you see them, you naturally want to get close to them. You do not analyze their individual talents, nor do you judge how dignified or impressive their appearance is, yet they seem to have a special and unique attraction for you. Another type of guru is one whose discipline and practice you need to carefully observe, as well as certain aspects of their personal background. In this case, for people in the mainland now, what kind of teacher is more suitable to choose? Gurus who are especially strict with discipline are indeed not very approachable, or in the vast majority of instances, the image they present to sentient beings is very conservative and restrained. It's also quite hard to find someone who is both talented, disciplined, and has genuine practice. All these qualities in one person. Once someone is talented, they might get involved in all sorts of things. And in terms of discipline, they may be relatively open. So in this situation, how should one choose a suitable guru?
First, when lay practitioners in the Han region of China seek to rely on a spiritual teacher for guidance on their path, is it better to rely on an open-minded guru or a conservative one? It's hard to find a conservative one in modern times, and it's also hard to say what's best with the open-minded ones who are more accessible. Actually, I think this question is quite simple to answer clearly. According to the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, in any exoteric or esoteric Buddhist scriptures, observing first is very important, because if you don't carefully observe the guru or pay attention to them, it can indeed be quite troublesome. Nowadays, many people, just as she asked earlier in her question, feel especially close to their guru at the very beginning of their relationship, or have a kind of impulsive feeling of devotion. But later on, many unpleasant things can happen as well over time, including at first having great and strong faith in the guru with complete confidence in their heart. But later the disciple's faith changes too. The guru's blessings also change. Sometimes between the two of them, very serious conflicts and contradictions can even arise over various issues and disagreements. The disciple may even start to slander the guru without any restraint at all, finding fault here and there constantly and relentlessly. The guru might also say that this is breaking vows and criticize the disciple. This kind of phenomenon is quite common nowadays, but in reality, I think the main reason is that people didn't observe the guru carefully at the beginning. If you do observe the guru, then once you truly rely on them, you shouldn't turn back. Even if the guru manifests in any kind of appearance, you still shouldn't turn away. The requirements in both the exoteric and esoteric traditions are extremely strict. It's not just in the esoteric tradition. There are also very clear records in the exoteric tradition, such as in the Avatamsaka Sutra. So I think, generally speaking, when we look for a guru to guide us, it's best to first look for someone relatively conservative in behavior. That's a bit better overall. If you can find someone with pure discipline and wisdom in all aspects who is excellent in every way, that's the best and most beneficial for practice. We sentient beings have so many discriminating thoughts. At first, we may have a genuinely pure mind toward the guru, but in the end, it's uncertain whether we can maintain that state of mind. This is also very important. Of course, for many of us nowadays, it's quite challenging and difficult to find such a remarkable and exceptional guru. In some monasteries in Tibetan region, there are many great masters with pure discipline. However, on the one hand, they rarely have the opportunity to come to Han regions. And even if they do come, there is unfortunately a language communication barrier challenge. Even if the language barrier is overcome, many Han Chinese disciples' personalities are not very compatible because some people don't actually need the dharma. They just want to be close to the teacher, have their fortunes told, or chat a bit. They especially take particular pleasure in some simple worldly conversations with others in daily life. But when it comes to very serious matters, including strict rules of dharma practice, they can't really accept it, nor are they used to it. This kind of situation does indeed exist in reality. Strictly speaking, it is still generally best for a person to have a rather strict and demanding teacher. Someone who often keeps you in check and supervises you regularly. This is very necessary. But nowadays, this may not be particularly easy to find. However, I think some teachers still have very skillful methods for teaching different students effectively. With these skillful methods, their conduct can take many different forms and appearances. It also depends on your own level of faith. If you can accept it with genuine devotion, then relying on a more open-minded teacher is also quite reasonable and appropriate for your practice. In this way, things are more relaxed. But it is indeed most important to rely on a spiritual teacher over the long term. Their personal conduct is not what's most important. It should always be the dharma. I've seen some disciples in the past who were especially dependent on their teacher, and the teacher also cared deeply for the disciple. But sometimes, due to impermanence, when a certain time comes, the relationship between teacher and disciple is not always particularly close or special. At a certain point, it seems the teacher eventually becomes indifferent toward them. The disciple himself also voluntarily leaves the teacher. When he leaves the teacher, he hasn't learned any dharma at all. I've encountered such cases before, because during the process of relying on the teacher, he only relied on some of the teacher's actions, on his smiles. Apart from simply following some of the teacher's outer behaviors in a superficial way, he didn't understand the deeper true dharma, meaning within the teacher's conduct at all. So, when he truly left the teacher, he hadn't learned anything at all. He followed the teacher for many years, but in the end, he didn't learn anything. Many people around him were actually quite worried about him. In the past, he always looked down on everyone, firmly believing that his own teacher was the very best. Now he himself is just like someone who is struggling with worldly attachments. His faith in the teacher has changed, and once it changed, if he had learned some dharma while he was with the teacher, then, even if he eventually departed, that precious dharma could still accompany him. Although in Buddhism, one should not ask to leave or abandon one's teacher if he has learned the dharma, that's also acceptable. But in the end, if he has neither the dharma nor the teacher, that's truly tragic. So I suggest, no matter who your teacher is, it's best to form a connection through the dharma. That's the most important thing. Other worldly attachments, the emotional bonds between teacher and student, are very likely to be impermanent at some point. Our human minds can change very easily. For a certain period of time, I liked wearing black clothes. After a while, I didn't really want to wear those clothes anymore, so I started wearing a different kind of clothing. So in fact, our personalities as humans are not fixed or unchangeable. If you truly gain some understanding of the Dharma through genuine practice, that is your real value and lasting benefit in this life.
I'm more familiar with Chan Buddhism. The Buddha once held up a flower and smiled at Vulture Peak, then passed it down through generations to Mahakashyapa, and through 28 generations to Bodhidharma, and then to our first patriarch, second patriarch, third patriarch, fourth patriarch, and sixth patriarch. The Dharma transmission lineage is clear. But when we look at the words of my perfect teacher today, were these instructions actually personally transmitted by the Buddha directly? What is the origin of this particular lineage? Did Patrul Rinpoche compile it based on his own teacher's teachings, or was it secretly passed down from the Buddha? Is there a clear lineage origin?
Yes, there is a clear lineage here. Here we have both the teachings of the Sutrayana and the Vajrayana traditions together. The Vajrayana teachings all follow from Samantabhadra Tathagata as the primordial Buddha, and in fact, Samantabhadra Tathagata is no different from Shakyamuni Buddha in terms of their ultimate nature and realization. To pure beings with realized perception, he appears as Samantabhadra Tathagata, the Vajradhara Sambhogakaya, and to ordinary beings as an emanation Nirmanakaya. We often say that among the 12 great Dzogchen masters in the lineage, one of them is Shakyamuni Buddha himself. From Shakyamuni Buddha, the lineage was passed down, and the Dzogchen secret teachings transmitted by Shakyamuni Buddha are of two types or categories. One type is like the Kalachakra Tantra and the Manjushri Namasamgiti. These were all taught by the Buddha during his lifetime to certain individuals. There is also another portion of Tantric teachings, which the Buddha prophesied and foretold would be transmitted by King Ja to disciples 28 years after his own parinirvana. Some were also passed down by Guru Padmasambhava and Vimalamitra, as the Buddha had also prophesied. Therefore, this kind of lineage in our Nyingma tradition. Recently, I translated the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism by the second Dudjom Rinpoche. In the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism, it starts from Shakyamuni Buddha, then the two supreme ones and the 6 ornaments, and traces the lineage all the way to the present-day Dzogchen, recounting all the stories of the transmission. I just finished translating it before Liu Ruiji and others had translated it, but it was hard to understand since it was all in classical Chinese. This book covers everything from exoteric to esoteric schools, especially Dzogchen, detailing which lineage masters have passed it down to the present day. It might be over 200,000 characters, and it's quite clear in this regard.
They have a saying that when the Buddha first turned the wheel of Dharma, he taught the teachings of the Hinayana. During the second turning of the wheel, he taught the Mahayana Prajnaparamita Sutras, which are considered to be among the most profound teachings. And in the third turning of the wheel, he transmitted the Tibetan Vajrayana teachings. Is this comprehensive? Did the third turning of the wheel really transmit the Vajrayana?
This statement is basically accurate overall. Indeed, the first turning of the wheel was the Hinayana teaching of the Four Noble Truths. The second turning of the wheel, then, was the Prajnaparamita teachings on emptiness. Although the 3 turnings of the wheel do not directly mention Tibetan or esoteric transmission, in the third turning of the Dharma wheel, as I just mentioned to you earlier, the focus is on the luminous aspect of Buddha nature and its qualities. In the exoteric tradition of the sutras, this is taught in a rather hidden and indirect way to students. In Vajrayana, however, it is explained in a much more explicit and direct manner through skillful means. During the third turning of the wheel, the emphasis is placed upon Buddha nature, luminosity, the Pure Lands. Speaking of the explanations of the third turning, when Maitreya Bodhisattva explained this, in the Uttara Tantra, and when Nagarjuna Bodhisattva explained it in the In Praise of Dharmadhatu, they centered their discussions around this key point. It was not stated directly, the turning of the wheel of Vajrayana teachings. It is not referred to in this way. But in fact, it can actually be indirectly called related to Vajrayana teachings, or at least close to them, because within the third turning of the wheel, including many principles found in the Avatamsaka Sutra, It discusses pure realms, such as the countless Buddhas in each dust mote of a pure land, and similar principles. These are much deeper teachings that cannot be found at all in the first or second turnings of the wheel, so it can be acknowledged in this way.
So, the teachings transmitted in the first turning of the wheel, the second turning, and the third turning, is there a sequence among these three? There is an interpretation that says during the second turning of the wheel, it actually negates some aspects of the first turning. At first, it talks about the Four Noble Truths, suffering, origin, cessation, and path. But in the Mahayana, there is no suffering, origin, cessation, or path. The Heart Sutra mentions this. In the third turning of the wheel, the great luminosity, there is again a great perfection. Is this a negation of the first and second turnings of the wheel? Is there such a sequence?
Yes, that's exactly what I was talking about just now. During the very first turning of the wheel, for people of ordinary or average capacity, if you were to directly tell them that all phenomena are empty by nature, it would be a huge and significant blow to them, and they simply would not be able to accept it. So first, the existence of all phenomena was carefully explained to them. Then it was explained that this existence actually has no true substance and is entirely empty in nature. When it comes to the third turning, it's not just about emptiness alone. If it's mere emptiness, one falls into the extreme of nihilism. There is also the aspect of luminosity, but sentient beings have different capacities to understand luminosity. Even within Tibetan Buddhism, there are actually many debates and subtle differences among the various schools regarding this. Each school has its own different understanding of the luminous aspect. So ultimately, it can be as you personally understand it. From the perspective of someone with a certain level of capacity, one first understands form is emptiness, and then emptiness is form. Then, form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form. This is called first discerning emptiness and then realizing the union of emptiness and appearance, free from elaboration and in a state of equality. This is called the 4 stages of Madhyamaka, progressing step by step.
Master, hello. I would like to respectfully inquire about a somewhat worldly question, if I may. We all know that the 6th Dalai Lama, Changyang Gyatso, wrote many beautiful love poems back then. In the history of Chinese literature, they are considered some of its brightest gems. My question is, how should we view and understand such actions by a tulku as people of later generations? How should those of us reflecting on these events from our own time look at and interpret these actions? How did he handle the conflict between human nature and Buddha nature, the struggle between the divine and the human, and then the conflict between reason and emotion? Thank you.
First of all, since I'm certainly not a tulku, it's actually very difficult for me to answer a question that is specifically meant for a tulku. I'm just like you in that regard. So for someone who isn't a tulku to answer a question for a tulku is quite difficult for me, but I can still share my own personal opinion on this matter. The 6th Dalai Lama, Changyang Gyatso, was a very renowned poet of his time. His poetry at the time should be said to have accurately reflected the social phenomena of that era and the cultural context of Tibetan society back then. It also reflected the feelings that ordinary people had about their love, about Buddhism, and various sentiments towards society at that time. Therefore, in our Tibetan Buddhism, his poetry is very famous. Not just his poetry, but also the works that are attributed to him. Actually, because he was a truly unique and remarkable historical figure, that's why some of his poems have already been translated into Chinese and English. As a result, many people have gradually come to know and learn about the scenes and aspects of life from that era. In fact, there are actually many such notable figures in Tibetan Buddhism. This includes some of the seemingly more conservative lamas that were just mentioned earlier. However, the songs and verses they wrote should, in many cases, far surpass those of Changyang Gyatso. In this regard, there are actually quite a lot in the current Tibetan language as well. Personally, I believe that due to Changyang Gyatso's particular circumstances at that time, as is evident from his secret biography, he was required to handle rather unique relationships. He had to manage not only worldly relationships, but also those that extended beyond the ordinary mundane sphere. He also had to play the significant role of a tulku while at the same time being actively involved in political affairs and so on. So at that time, the history and politics of Tibet were also extremely complex and intricate. In such circumstances and under such conditions, some of his poems are indeed quite representative of that particular era. On the surface, when we look at some of his songs, it seems like they talk about, for example, the emotions and feelings between men and women, some very beautiful poems. But in fact, every line carries some prophecy and prediction for the future. At the same time, they also touch on many issues related to spiritual practice and realization. That's why people often say that Changyang Gyatso's poetry has 3 layers of meaning: outer, inner, and secret. What we usually see on the market these days is probably just the outer superficial meaning of his poems. He describes this or that in simple terms. When he went out at that time from the palace, he went to see his friends in the city. When he came back the next day morning, it had snowed heavily overnight. His footprints had already been imprinted in the fresh white snow. He quietly asked the old dog not to tell anyone about what had happened, or else he would be exposed to everyone, and so on. In many situations, to us ordinary people with limited understanding, this seems very concrete and realistic on the surface level of interpretation. But in fact, there are also many profound things within his poetry, including what he said at the time in various verses. There are many prophecies of this kind hidden there, which reflect a lot of deeper meaning and spiritual insight. They show how an accomplished practitioner actually deals with the world and society through skillful means in daily life. I think that some of the teachings mentioned within are still very deeply profound even now.
Khenpo, hello. I hope you are doing well today. I have another question that I would like to ask you. This is also a question that I am asking on behalf of our Hebei Animal Release Alliance. Our Animal Release Alliance has more than 300 members, and we release animals over 100 times every year. We have made a vow to release animals 1,000 times in 10 years. But during the process of releasing animals, we have encountered several problems. I don't know whether this is in accordance with the teachings, whether we are accumulating merit or creating negative karma. For example, although during the process of releasing animals, we do investigate the environment and location for the release to see if it is suitable for their survival, and sometimes we also consider the timing. But even so, during the process of releasing animals, there are still situations where, for instance, when releasing fish and similar aquatic animals, there is approximately a 20% mortality rate on average. Sometimes after the release, some people might come and catch them again. In such cases, are we accumulating merit or creating negative karma? That's one question. Another issue is that now, during the process of animal release, for instance, like with pigeons and similar birds, you can simply open the cage and they will usually fly away on their own. But some larger birds or types of fowl are unable to leave on their own. So our fellow practitioners might gently pick them up or toss them into the air. Does this frighten or disturb them? Are we actually liberating or helping them, or are we creating negative karma? What would be the appropriate way to do this? Additionally, when it comes to the issue of animal release, our animal release group has encountered yet another problem. We hope you can give us some valuable guidance on this matter, because the original intention of animal release practice is to save sentient beings from suffering and death, and everyone here has vowed to be vegetarian. In the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch, Huineng says clearly, "The Buddha Dharma is always in the world. It cannot be found apart from worldly experience and phenomena. During this process, there may be some situations that are unavoidable. For example, we might end up having meat dishes. At such times, some of our fellow practitioners may not understand our actions at all, or may even become hostile. How should we best resolve these conflicts and contradictions effectively?"
Regarding the first question, here's my personal perspective. I am particularly fond of the practice of animal release. Moreover, I have made vows to consistently practice animal release and have encouraged others to do so for more than 20 years now, continuously. During the process of animal release, I have also noticed some of the issues you just mentioned, including not long ago when we participated in an event in Qinghai, a high-level Tibetan Buddhist seminar. At the seminar, some geshes also shared their views with everyone through written articles. Animal release is very risky, just as you mentioned earlier. Sometimes lives cannot be saved, and there are many, many other problems. It might be better to actively promote the idea of releasing people in the future instead. Those who are locked up in prison, or the pitiful ones, such as patients in hospitals who are at the very brink of life and death, and so on. He strongly emphasized not releasing animals, but releasing people instead. Later, in different settings, we also shared some opinions with him. I read some of his ideas. In fact, he summarized all the problems that exist in our animal release practices together. So, is every act of animal release like this in all cases? Actually, it's not precisely. As you just said, sometimes during the process of releasing animals into the wild or water bodies, when we release fish into the water, sometimes other people might come along and catch them again. When we release birds, unfortunately, there are times when they simply can't fly. Others might step on them and kill them or pick them up to eat. Or, for instance, we might sometimes put freshwater creatures into environments that are not their natural habitats. Does this kind of situation actually happen? Yes, it does. But just because of this reason, we might think that the merit of animal release is not significant, that it is meaningless, or that it does not create good karma. That's not the right way to look at it. Actually, when we release animals, it is entirely a virtuous act that brings merit. However, in terms of the methods, as someone who practices animal release, we should study them carefully. This is very necessary, whether it's lay Buddhists who buy animals for release or other Buddhists. They shouldn't act blindly. Just because they have money, they shouldn't go to the market and buy some animals at random. They don't even consider whether these animals can survive and just release them the next day regardless. This is being irresponsible to life and to one's own money. So we require that for the animals you're planning to release tomorrow, you must first consider whether they can survive after being released. This is the first issue you need to consider. If the animal is domesticated, it certainly will not be able to survive in the mountains. The first and most important issue is survival. The second issue is the specific location where you release them. If it's a bird, you need to consider what kind of park to release it in. Some time ago, we participated in an animal release event. They did not choose a suitable location. All the birds were set free, right on the busy main road with heavy traffic. As a result, when cars came, many of them were run over and killed. This is being irresponsible to life itself, so it's especially unreasonable. As you just mentioned, there are people who might catch them again. Does that actually happen? Occasionally, yes. But if we first go and carefully inspect the place where we plan to release them, in other places, including when Khenpo Tsultrim Lodro in Chengdu organizes releases, the group of lay practitioners there are very experienced. A couple of days before, they spend time driving around everywhere to check out different locations. Sometimes they even go to locations that are 4 or 5 hours away just to scout. If they find a place that's very safe, then they decide to do it there. When we do the release, it also takes 3 or 4 hours by car to get there, and it's relatively safe to release them there. During this process, it's quite possible that some people might catch a few. But this really won't be a major fault on our part. It's only a small portion, in fact. Actually, when we do animal releases, most of the time it's into such large bodies of water. Maybe a few might really get caught, but it's truly not like this happens to all of them. So, when it comes to weighing the pros and cons, we need to analyze things carefully and wisely. When analyzing this, first we should do our best to ensure that the animals we release can survive. We should try to find ways to increase their survival rate. The second issue is about eating vegetarian food during animal release ceremonies. Actually, we recommend that no matter what, when participating in animal release ceremonies. Of course, it's best if you can be vegetarian all the time, but if you really can't do it regularly, at least during the animal release event, everyone should eat vegetarian. Otherwise, if you release animals while eating meat, no matter how pure your intention is. Actually, in the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch, it is said that Buddhist teachings are not separate from worldly affairs. But that doesn't mean that just because worldly people eat meat, we must eat meat too. Therefore, in some practical matters in our daily lives, we should go along with them. Moreover, Buddhist teachings have actually revealed the truth within the world itself. It's not that just because people in the world steal things. And since Buddhist teachings are not separate from worldly affairs, we should go steal things too. Worldly people do bad things because they are just ordinary people. I should also join them in worldly affairs and do bad things. That's not exactly what it means. So I believe that no matter what, during the important period of releasing animals, everyone should try to adopt a truly vegetarian mindset. This is genuinely beneficial, both for oneself and for others.
Khenpo, if you don't mind, I have a few important questions that I would really like to ask you today. The first question is, because I am also reading your books, Khenpo, and I find them very good. Why is that? Because I think these books are relatively simple and easy to understand. But I would like to ask you a question, Khenpo, because I also have some friends who may not be Buddhists, but they might perhaps have good intentions, and I sincerely and highly recommend your books to them, Khenpo. But I want to ask you, Khenpo, if they only read these kinds of books, is that enough for ultimate realization? That's my first question. My second question is, I've also encountered some issues recently. I've actually been studying the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment with my master, Venerable Jichang, all along. But during my study process, I now feel that there are some issues. First, should I go especially fast, listening to a lot and reading many books every day? Second, I would like to ask Khenpo to give me some guidance to see if there is a better way for me to study the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, because I feel this scripture is extremely precious. But since my wisdom is somewhat limited, I may still need your guidance, Khenpo, to see if there might be some other helpful methods that could help me study the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment more effectively. That's the second question. The third question I would like to ask Khenpo, because in fact our time is very limited and we are also contemplating impermanence. Of course, we need to let go of attachment. Sometimes I wonder, is it possible that in our dreams we could also practice while we sleep? Is there any method for this? Please give me some guidance. I actually have quite a few different questions to ask. The fourth question is as follows. This morning the teacher also specifically mentioned the concept of the Achantika. That is, people like this may not be able to practice. Also, I have seen in some books that, of course, I think being born as a human is already very good, because humans, heavenly beings, and Asuras can all practice. But among humans, there are also many different kinds of people. Some have physical illnesses and some have various mental problems. Is it even possible to help them practice the Dharma effectively, or how should we best help them in a skillful way? These are questions that several other fellow practitioners are also very concerned about. Thank you.
You actually have quite a few questions. Well, I've honestly forgotten them all and don't really know. Let me address the first question. It's okay. I'll answer again if I forget something. My mind was a bit scattered just now too while listening. The first question is this. You just mentioned these particular books, Tales for Transforming Adversity and Achieve by Doing. These two books mainly consist of stories I shared during my lectures over the years. They are written using somewhat modern worldly language and concepts that people can relate to. Basically, each chapter tells a story and then explains a principle. People nowadays may have limited time, and each article isn't particularly long. That's how they were written. So, regarding your question just now, whether these can lead to ultimate realization, I think they can probably help change some perspectives because they don't really discuss the deeper, more specialized Buddhist teachings like those found in the words of my perfect teacher. I just think that after reading this book, it might serve as a reminder to oneself about some negative behaviors from the past. In the future, it can assist in positively guiding how one interacts with others and strives to be a kinder person in the world. For us practitioners, it's about accumulating merit and purifying obstacles and fostering loving kindness. My intention was not to discuss deeper levels of practice or realization in this book. It's just that in the very later part, I talked a little bit about some issues regarding death that many people are concerned about nowadays. I touched on these topics briefly. Whether this can lead to ultimate realization depends on the individual reading this book and their study of it. For some people, according to certain Zen traditions and their capacities, even a very simple and straightforward teaching can lead to true enlightenment. If someone genuinely has that kind of remarkable capacity, it is indeed possible to ultimately attain the highest realization and complete enlightenment. That was simply the first question. As for the second question you just mentioned regarding the stages of the path to enlightenment, actually back in 1997, I found a CD of Master Jichang's teachings on Path to Enlightenment. At that time, I was just starting out and didn't really understand much either. Regarding this Han Chinese monastic study of Tibetan Buddhism, Once when His Holiness was ill, he was recuperating at the Chengdu International Metropolis. Every single day, I carefully carried a small black audio recorder and attentively listened to Master Ji Chang's recordings. I actually listened to about more than half of it, but later on, I stopped listening. Actually, I really enjoyed Master Ji Chang's teachings. Later, in our academy, Khenpo Yeshe also gave teachings on it. There are also many other teachings on this topic. The great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment is truly excellent. But unfortunately, many people can't understand or make sense of the later sections. Because when Master Tsongkhapa was composing the great treatise, when he got to the end, it became too profound. He was worried that no one would understand it and considered not continuing to write. But then Manjushri Bodhisattva appeared before him and told him, if you keep writing, there will be people who can understand it. So Master Tsongkhapa gathered his courage and continued writing. Indeed, last year, Khenpo Yeshe also didn't continue teaching the later sections. It's probably not that he couldn't teach them. But later, perhaps due to time constraints or some other reason, Master Ji Chang also covered the later parts rather briefly in his teachings to us. The later sections may indeed be quite difficult to understand, but I still recommend everyone to study them. The great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment is a key Gelug text. I often say the Gelug school's great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, the Nyingma school's The Words of My Perfect Teacher, these two teachings can be considered the most comprehensive encyclopedias for our spiritual practice today. As for the third question, you mentioned certain situations in dreams. Each of our lives is limited. But doing good deeds in dreams is indeed somewhat difficult. Although in some Nyingma Tantric teachings there are certain instructions for practicing virtue both during the day and in dreams, but such instructions should only be practiced once one has reached a relatively high level of realization. So, if we like, we can continue to practice in this way. What was the last question? Right, you mentioned the matter of ikchantikas. Generally, people who are mentally disturbed or hold wrong views may encounter some obstacles. However, in Mahayana Buddhism, in fact, the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch also states that the existence of true ikchantikas seems to be untenable as well. This is also mentioned in Maitreya Bodhisattva's Ornament of the Sutras. It's just that, for the time being, these people are heavily burdened by karma. Their karma is deep-rooted in terms of wisdom, body, and in all aspects. If they themselves, through such causes and conditions, develop genuine faith in the Dharma and give rise to renunciation. Even among the people around us in our daily lives, we should not exclude them simply because of their shortcomings or mistaken views. Instead, we must try every possible way to help and support them with compassion. These individuals will definitely form an excellent and meaningful connection with the Dharma. History also shows that when many people first started learning, including Bodhisattva Asvaghosha, many of them were originally non-Buddhists and were especially opposed to the Dharma. From the perspective of wrong views, they seemed to be ikchantikas who had severed their roots of virtue. But in reality, they later became great propagators of the Dharma. I think the spirit of Buddhism is like this. We should make sincere and patient efforts with these people and will gradually discover their seeds of goodness. The mental illness she mentioned earlier might be more severe, like psychosis or similar conditions. How can we effectively and compassionately help them? Regardless of whether it's psychosis or any other condition, we should still try to help.
Khenpo, is my understanding correct that even if they themselves are unable to see, hear, or practice the Dharma, we can still use the power of our own aspirations or compassionate wishes to continuously pray for them, bless them, help them accumulate some merit, and help purify their negative karma? Then, by doing what we are able to do, we can make efforts to help them.
Yes, this is also a method. All right, due to time constraints, our Q&A session will conclude here.